The High Counselor stood rigidly at the command deck of the Celestial Dawn, his two hearts pounding beneath his chest. His reptilian eyes darted between the view screen and the nervous expressions of the ambassadors around him. They were all waiting, for doom or for salvation. Neither was certain. 13 ships had appeared on the edge of Union space, dark behemoths bristling with weapons. Vor's long fingers tapped anxiously on the railing before him. The Dras had arrived. The Dras were not just another species, they were the stuff of nightmares. Vor had heard stories of their ruthless campaigns across the galaxy, crushing civilizations and leaving only silence in their wake. They demanded tribute from entire star systems, and when they didn't receive it, they annihilated all in their path. Vor swallowed hard. This was the moment he had prayed never to see in his lifetime, the moment where all the Union's carefully built diplomacy would be tested against the galaxy's most feared force. On the deck behind him, the 13 ambassadors of the Union of Planets were seated in a rough semicircle, their collective anxiety palpable. Each represented a different species, from the massive bear-like Urok to the pale, telepathic Thant. All were leaders of their respective worlds, powerful in their own right, yet today, they were little more than frightened children waiting for a verdict. Vorak, as High Counselor, was supposed to guide them, but right now he felt like he was guiding them straight into the jaws of oblivion. His gaze briefly rested on the newest member of their council, the human ambassador, Captain Mark Callahan. Humans were still a mystery to Vor and the others, having only joined the Union mere months ago. Their entry had been controversial, rash, young, and seemingly undisciplined. Now, Callahan sat there, a faint smile on his lips, his posture relaxed despite the tension in the room. Vor couldn't understand it. Was it arrogance, foolishness, or something else entirely? Vor's thoughts were interrupted as the view screen blinked to life. The Dras flagship dominated the display, a jagged, dark ship that radiated menace. Then, the Dras commander appeared. He was tall and gaunt, his green skin almost luminescent against the darkness behind him. His angular face was impassive, yet his eyes, those eyes, bore into Vor's soul, sharp and unyielding. Vor forced himself to meet the Dras commander's gaze, though every instinct screamed at him to look away. Glorious and powerful Dras commander, Vor began, his voice trembling slightly, we welcome you and are honored by your presence in these negotiations. The Dras commander did not move. His eyes flicked across the faces on the screen before settling back on Vorak. There was a long, agonizing silence before the commander finally spoke, his voice low and dangerous. You may call me Commander, he said through the translator, his tone flat and unfeeling. Gracious Commander, Vor continued, bowing his head deeply. We appreciate your patience and restraint. From the corner of his eye, Vor saw Callahan smirk, quickly covering his mouth with his hand. Vor glared at him, his warning clear, this was no time for irreverence. The Dras commander's eyes narrowed slightly. Enough to prevent your annihilation. What do you offer the Dras? Vor swallowed the lump in his throat. This was it, the moment of truth. The fate of billions rested on his words. He stepped forward, bowing his head once more. Greatest of the Dras commanders, as the head of the Union, we offer you the third arm of our home system, from the star known as Plist to the planet True. It includes thousands of mineral-rich asteroids, 5 planetary bodies and their moons, and a rogue planet. The commander tilted his head, the barest hint of disappointment flashing in his eyes. Next, he said, waving his hand dismissively. One by one, the ambassadors offered their tributes, planets, resources, even fleets of ships. Each voice quivered with fear as they sacrificed their worlds, hoping it would be enough to buy their survival. But the commander's response remained the same, cold indifference. He was unimpressed. Finally, it was Callahan's turn. Vorak braced himself, hoping against hope that the human wouldn't do something reckless. Callahan stood, his expression calm, but there was a fire in his eyes. Most noble and majestic commander, Callahan began, his voice clear and strong. He did not bow. Vor's heart skipped a beat. How could he be so brazen? As the newest member of the Union, Callahan continued, we cannot offer you our controlled space or resources. Vor's breath caught in his throat. What was Callahan doing? But, Callahan said, pausing for effect, what we can offer you is a big glass of shut the hell up. The silence that followed was deafening. Every eye in the room turned to Callahan, wide with disbelief and horror. Vor's hands gripped the railing so tightly that his knuckles turned white. This was it. This was the end. The Dras commander's eyes snapped to Callahan, his expression unreadable. Who said that? He hissed, his voice shaking with fury. Before Callahan could respond, every ambassador pointed directly at him. The human only smirked, stepping forward to face the commander on the screen. I did, Callahan said firmly, and I meant every word. The commander's gaze narrowed further, his hands gripping the armrests of his chair. Your translator suggests you intend to defy us. Is that correct? Vor tried to intervene, his voice shaky. Gracious Commander, silence, worm, the Dras commander roared, his focus entirely on Callahan. Let him speak. Callahan met the commander's gaze without flinching. I don't just intend to defy you, he said, his voice rising with anger. I'm making it clear that under no circumstance will we bow to you. Not now. Not ever. Vor's legs gave out beneath him, and he collapsed to the floor. It was over. They were all going to die. For a moment, the Dras commander said nothing, his face impassive. Then, slowly, a deep, rumbling laugh began to echo through the ship's speakers. The Dras commander leaned back in his chair, his laughter filling the room. Finally, he said, a wide grin spreading across his face. Finally, we have found you. Callahan blinked, his confidence faltering for the first time. Found us? What are you talking about? The Dras commander's eyes gleamed with a new light, one that Vorak had never seen before. It was not malice, but excitement. We have been searching the galaxy for you, the commander said, his grin widening. A race worthy of standing against us. A race that will not cower in fear. Vor stared in disbelief as the commander's words washed over him. This was not the reaction he had expected, not at all. The Dras commander leaned forward again, his eyes locking onto Callahan. Tell me, human, he said softly, what do you think of war? Callahan, regaining his composure, smiled back at the commander. I think, he said slowly, that we've just found a new kind of game to play. And with that, the storm on the horizon shifted, not into war, but something far more dangerous. The High Counselor, watching Vor from his fallen position, realized this was only the beginning. A thick silence hung in the air after Callahan's defiant words. The entire command deck was frozen, the other ambassadors paralyzed by shock, their eyes locked on the view screen where the Dras commander glared back. Vorak, still seated on the floor, couldn't believe what had just happened. This human, this reckless fool, had thrown the entire Union's survival into jeopardy with one audacious insult. The Dras commander's eyes narrowed. He leaned closer to the view screen, his sharp features illuminated by the cold light of his ship's command bridge. You mock us, he hissed, his voice dripping with venom. You think your pitiful species is above annihilation? Callahan didn't flinch. If anything, he seemed even more resolute. I don't mock you, he replied evenly. I'm challenging you. You've grown complacent, pushing around species too terrified to fight back. That's not power. That's stagnation. Vor's heart sank. He had seen the Dras destroy entire worlds for less. His gaze darted to the other ambassadors. None of them dared to speak. They were as shocked as he was by Callahan's boldness. He wanted to stop the human, to beg for mercy, but he couldn't find his voice. Fear had swallowed his courage whole. The Dras commander remained silent for a moment, studying Callahan with a new intensity. Then, to everyone's surprise, he began to laugh, a deep, resonant sound that filled the deck. It was an eerie, unsettling laugh, but it wasn't the laugh of a man who had been insulted. It was something else entirely. You amuse me, human, the commander said finally, his laughter subsiding. For centuries, we have searched for a species that would meet us not with fear, but with fire. Every race we encountered bent the knee. We grew tired of their cowardice. But you are different. Vor's mind reeled. Different? Was the commander genuinely entertained by Callahan's defiance? This was not the response he had expected at all. The Dras were known for their ruthlessness, their cold, calculating nature. And yet here was their leader, laughing at the very notion of resistance. Callahan tilted his head slightly, a hint of curiosity in his expression. "So, what now?" he asked. The commander leaned back in his chair, a predatory smile curling on his lips. "Now, human, we see if your species is truly worthy of standing against us. We will not annihilate you, yet. Instead, we will give you time. Time to prepare. Time to fight. And when we return, we will see if you can offer more than just words." A shiver ran down Vor's spine. This wasn't a reprieve, it was a challenge. The Dras weren't backing down. They were inviting war.